Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad we come to the second part of our conference, and I have the honor to introduce to you our kind host, Professor Ильи Kásavin. He will speak on the nature of global projects, engineering, politics, philosophy, etc. And the presentation will be followed by comments by Alex Loser from Germany. Professor Kásavin, thank you.
What would I like to present to you? It's a kind of case study. This is a case study of very complex phenomena in which science, technology, politics, philosophy, economy, and so forth interact, and that's why it is from one side very difficult to analyze, but from the other side it is extremely interesting. I was immediately inspired to do this case study, and case study refers to a huge techno-social phenomena entitled the Karakum Canal in Turkmenistan. I was inspired to do this case study by reading Platonov and Faustovsky, very well-known Russian writers of the first part of the 20th century, who in their turn have great concerns about such a large-scale techno-social projects and describe many of them, analyze many of them in their writings. Both of them, as many others, in their background, among other things, have Russian cosmos. So they were devoted proponents of this philosophy. And this philosophy implies a kind of holistic worldview. It's I would dub it a kind of naturalistic pantheism, if you like to use European philosophical terminology. So it implies a kind of holistic worldview about a joint development of society and nature. And surprisingly, this particular project of the Karakum construction in the desert, so the case of hydraulic engineering, simply, yes, reveals its connection with some philosophical background in which the terms amelioration, this is a kind of hydraulic engineering technology, and meliorism, as a kind of philosophical worldview, are united. And after that, I discovered that there is a long history of studying, planning, managing, and constructing such global projects from Peter the Great to Stalin and perhaps to Putin as well. So as an introduction, it's enough. And I should say that this case study is very logical, very natural within the current developments of STS, that is Science and Technology Studies, which undergone at least 3 decisive shifts or drifts, which have been partly described by previous speaker. I mean the drift from Carnap to Popper, from the analysis of structure to the analysis of the growth of scientific knowledge, and the drift from the analysis of knowledge, scientific knowledge, to the analysis of the complex of the scientific knowledge and practice by Kuhn. And then one more turn from the analysis of science to the analysis of science in a complex social-cultural context, in which this context reveals perhaps more attention, attracts perhaps more attention than science itself. It is Paul Feyerabend. And besides all, this is, I will go further, and besides all, there is an interesting fork between two main directions within STS. They are represented by key figures, I think. This is David Bloor and Sergio Sismondo. David Bloor considers STS as a local case studies of science and technology, primarily by historical sociological methods, mainly disregarding what philosophy does in this context. And the relevance of philosophy for STS is defended by Sergio Sismondo, and besides, he was, as you can see there on this picture, he was a participant at the first conference on social philosophy of science, previous November 2014. So I should say that the attention to philosophical background of STS reveals that there are dependence of some methodological, conceptual contradictions within STS on the same polarization within philosophy. So philosophy is important within STS. This is the idea. One more. I would skip this slide, but I should say there is a problem how to understand what case studies are. Should they be necessarily local, concentrated upon very concrete details analyzed by social, culture, social and human sciences, or they can be also not so local, so devoted to a huge phenomenon which are distributed in time and space, I should say. This is a problem, and I think we shall gain much more philosophical content if we consider case studies primarily as a way to finding and analyzing some paradigm case or cases which can be extrapolated for many other cases. And here we need, of course, another view of science and technology, much more general. Dealing with this concrete case study, we have to pay attention to the epoch in which everything started. This was a great epoch of the great kings, and at the same time, the rise of capitalism. 1649 is the execution of the Karl I, English king, within the Civil War, and 1725, Karl I, yes, and 1725 is the death of Peter the Great. Here we see William of Orange, famous English king, Louis the 40th, French king, and the Peter the Great who had to act in this very within this very powerful context. I should say to prove him in face of those figures of European history. This is a picture of Russia in the 17th century, though it's not a small country. It occupies a pretty big territory, but it has absolutely no access to neither to Baltic Sea nor to the Black Sea. And it has no access to main trade routes of European communication. So the idea of Peter the Great was on the one side to conquer the access to the both seas. But he was a realist. It was extremely difficult, and his first attempts failed. And that's why he understood that to organize trade routes, there is a big possibility inside Russia to organize the trade routes using rivers and canals between them. There are two main projects of Peter the Great, European and Asian. European, it is a Volga-Don Canal. In the background you can see Volga-Don Canal today, canal. So his idea was to unite the Don and Volga basins, and that's why the Caspian and Black Seas. As I said, it allows creating transport arteries connecting the whole Russia. And more than that, Russia would become a unique trade intermediary for all surrounding countries if he succeeded. The first attempt failed again, but it was a good experience for Stalin to construct Volga-Don Canal near contemporary Volgograd much later. This is a famous novel of Andrei Platonov, The Epiphan Locks, devoted to this initial effort to construct canal between the Volga and the Don basins. I will cite how he characterizes the intentions of Peter the Great. That Tsar wants to create a solid water track between the Baltic Sea and the Black and Caspian Seas to overcome the vast spaces of the continent to India. Mind this term, to India. This is a Columbus problem. Yeah? The Mediterranean kingdoms and Europe. The Tsar plans this firmly. The insight for this comes from trade and the merchant estate, which nearly in full trades in Moscow and adjacent towns. And the country's wealth is also in the interior of the continent, from where there is no way out, except for through linking the great rivers by canals and sailing by them solidly from the Persians to St. Petersburg and from Athens to Moscow, and as well as towards the Urals to Lake Araba, to the Kalmuk steppes and far. And now you can see the map of Russia in the next century, after the Peter's death. The access to Baltic Sea has been already conquered. The access to the Black Sea is also. And so the Caspian Sea is not so important, it's local. But through the Baltic Sea, Russia could organize trade with nearly all European countries, and through the Black Sea there was an access, of course, to the Mediterranean and so forth. I will dwell upon, especially on his Eastern project. Trying to find a proper way to China, India, Persian, and so forth. Peter the Great took interest in the possibilities of using the old ancient bed of the Amu Darya River. This is one of the greatest rivers in this, how do you call it, Near East or Middle East, I don't know, the terms, terminology differs, yes? So, he sent an expedition, 3 expeditions, more than that, 3 expeditions to discover the best ways how to do this. And this is his instruction to Prince Beckerich-Cherkassky, who led this expedition. First, to persuade the Khan of Khiva to loyalty. Khiva is the territory of contemporary Turkmenistan, or partly Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, I think. To persuade the Khan of Khiva to loyalty and alliance through promising hereditary tenure to him, to which purpose guards will be attached to him. Second, to ask him to send his men, accompanied by 2 of ours, by the Sirdarya River upward to the town of Ильи to survey for wool. And finally, to ask him to give us ships and send a merchant by the Amu Darya to India, and to order him to travel it over as long as vessels can go, and then to go to India. Andrei Platonov worked as a meliorator in his younger years and used to sign official documents like this: Comrade Platonov, Province Meliorator. The archive data have been recently published, so we can use them. He united in his life solving the practical problems of irrigation and draining, and at the same time contemplating on the worldview significance of this very technology for the Russian village, and perhaps for the Russian destiny in general, yes, if you like. And writing one article, Platonov dubbed the Karakum Desert the hot Arctic. This is a quotation from him. The task of socialist Turkmenistan culture is not to respect clay ruins of the powerful ancient world or their study, although this task is also in our focus, but to develop the Karakum industrially and agriculturally, and to create a great Turkmenistan oasis in one of the most sorrowful places of our planet. So this is a picture of Karakum Canal before, Karakum Desert before the canal was constructed. Absolutely gray or black. Kara means black. And it made Turkmenistan very poor land during the centuries because of the lack of irrigation. People always dreamed that waters of Amu Darya River, very powerful river, will come and will make this territory a kind of second Egypt, because the weather is to some extent similar there. That's why there were a great number of different expeditions during the 18th and even 20th century dealing with the possibility how to construct this canal. But the construction itself has been started only shortly after the October Revolution, and mainly after Stalin's death, both name and the route of the canal were firmly determined. So it took 35 years that have been broken by perestroika, by the way. The canal has not been completed to the end. But to some extent, the whole idea was successful because the construction took 1,100 kilometers. And the idea was to connect Amudarya River. I will give you an idea of what I am saying due to this map. So, I cannot use something. So, on the north-eastern boundary of Turkmenistan, you can see blue line. This is Amudarya River. And it starts down. I will come here perhaps just to show you. So this is Amudarya, and the canal itself starts here and unites the basins of two rivers, Murgab and Techen, going further to Ashgabat, and in principle it should connect Amudarya with Caspian Sea over here, but it was broken. The general assessment of the results of this construction is negative. High seepage, evaporation, soil salinization are obvious consequences. So, inefficient use of water and environmental damage. But we can raise a question first. Could this be avoided? We know for certain that the project was imperfect originally from the very beginning, especially according to modern requirements. So to exclude all negative consequences, water should go through a concrete or even plastic pipe. However, this would have required different costs and times, and the canal would have never been completed and even started. Please mind the following. In spite of these negative consequences, the Karakum Canal was a big trigger for Turkmenistan's primary and secondary modernization. Now this country is not so poor. It is a large gas producer and the world's fourth in explored natural gas reserves. It is already something. And conditions have been created to develop agriculture, navigation, fishery, tourism, and so on and so forth, and education, by the way. And after its separation from the Soviet Union, Turkmenistan, perhaps it's the unique country in the world, allocates funds for free electric energy, water use, gas consumption, utility and transport costs are minimal or nominal even, and average salary is about in Armenia. So, how much time do I have actually? How much time?
You have 40 minutes and you started at, so you have 15 minutes.
15 minutes?
15 minutes.
Okay. And now I switch to contemporary assessment of what is this canal represents, what does this canal represent, how can we estimate such global projects, and in doing this I will base myself on Zygmunt Bauman's very well-known ontological metaphor of zero friction society or liquid world. I think this is the best way to characterize mega projects as a form of globalized political economy, but also a globalized of postmodern culture, if you like. So this metaphysical component of mega project is characterized by Bauman as a great war for independence from space. He meant that in modern society, commodities, money, information, and people move incredibly fast, covering previously inaccessible distances. That's why this fast moving allows a special technology used in mega project, a technology of a social leap. This is a famous book written by three Danish authors with a very characteristic title, Mega Project and Risk, and Anatomy of Ambition. The authors found out that mega projects always cost more than expected, and the demand for them is usually lower than planned. And still, the practice of mega project continues if nothing were wrong and no one is interested in the economy. A very good example for this is a tunnel under the British Channel. It is used to 18%, and it is not profitable at all. Although the investments, you can imagine how huge were the investments. So the main characteristics of mega projects are singled out by these authors. First, inherent risks of a long-term planning horizon and the complexity of interfaces between the project and its context. The second, planning, decision-making, and management are poly-subject, poly-agent processes with conflicting interests. The third, which follows from the first one, goals and objectives change with time. And finally, shortcomings in planning result in an inadequate budget and a shortfall in profits. The conclusion of these authors runs as follows. The drawbacks of mega projects can be compensated by more adequate information about the project environment and more advanced methods of calculation, planning, forecasting, and control. And they propose a number of indexes that should be added to every calculation to improve it. It looks very plausible if you read this book. But the question arises, we can easily imagine another authors from another country who come and say, okay, you have made these calculations with the help of these indexes. Let me also add some more indexes to improve your calculation. Why is my action is worse than yours? So we can add indexes infinitely, so to speak. Is it a real decision for this problem? At the background you can see the famous picture of the Babylon Tower, one of the most intriguing, perhaps, and most well-known global projects. That failed, of course. Babylon Tower. Babylon Tower. I would propose to make a difference, to draw a difference between mega projects and global projects to avoid this policy of adding more and more indexes. These are 5 characteristics of global projects, partly overlapping with mega projects. Global project pursues not a particular goal, but an objective, super goal, which actually cannot be achieved. The second, global project meets the deep aspiration of the people, creates history, and outlines the future. That's why it includes elements of a myth, utopic ideology, and so-called national idea. Global project gives preference to projection rather than to prediction. The ideal dominates over knowledge. And global project works as a kind of a priori structure, a priori condition of further research. Once planned, it already contains prospects of various studies and requires them. Global project rests on a dialectical social ontology. The spontaneous inhomogeneity of development makes a social leap possible. And finally, which is also characteristic to the mega project, global project is marked by the complexity, the concentration of resources, high risks, and low payback. But it differs from mega project being limited in optimization. Engineering assessments of global project play an insignificant role for decision making. And this was the case of Columbus, who proposed to Spanish Queen Isabella of Castile this global project of finding the way to China and India. And this queen was wise enough to order her very intelligent man, Monk Talavera, to organize a commission to assess this project. These people were very competent, according to the standards of their time. And of course, they issued a negative opinion. It is impossible with our means, without technical means, with our knowledge, geographical and so forth, to reach China or India using ships. However, Isabella was a woman, and she was a queen. And that's why he paid less attention to technical details and accepted the project. And Spain, surprisingly, jumped to rank among the world's wealthiest powers, thanks to the success of this project. Note that Isabella risked only 3 small ships and 100 of sailors, about 100 of sailors. It was a chance for a colossal gain incomparable with the costs. And Turkmens were also lucky with their Karakum Canal. Conclusion. on the background, you can see the well-known temple of Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. And I would like to put this question. Is it possible to live in a risk society without risking anything, instead merely adapting to the current situation post factum by minimizing the risks? Or on the contrary, perhaps we should proceed on the contrary. We should face risk with so-called our visa raised, hoping that heroic jump will bring us to the top of the Mount Olympus. And by the way, there are such projects like Sagrada Familia, which is requires also a huge investments, but it has been already built during last 133 years only in private donation. We can, of course, in this case, calculate economic effect, but is it worth doing? Thank you very much.